Welcome to Friday night's video and our second master series. This is the fourth video in our second master series, and tonight we want to address signal flow. I very much am going to make this very simple. This is something you need to research for the studio that you put together. As you're learning, I recommend a very simple setup. That means you've got a MIDI input keyboard with a MIDI input cord going in. You've got a simple audio interface with no extras on it. No, keep it simple. Microphone, cords going to it. I recommend using XLR cords going into your DAW. Now, you're running that possibly in your DAW or in your hub that's going to your computer that basically is going out from there to your monitors and your headphones and whatnot like that. That's probably coming off your audio interface. The simpler setup you have while you're learning, the better. As you get more familiar with what you're doing, you can add to it until it looks like Chris Lord Algae Studio. Great. Your MGM Studio, whatever. You're going to spend $10 million. That's great. But as you learn, you will understand your signal flow and what's going on in there in a simple setup that basically can get it done. So when you add to it and you do more complex things, that they're just an extension of the simple setup that you've put together. Now, there are some videos on my channel about signal flow, and I suggest you watch them because they're very pertinent in audio engineering. And the difference between signal flow and electrical lines and in a DAW is signals get passed by code in software. So to really explain to you a lot of things happen there, you'd have to explain a lot of code, which I'm not explaining code in my master series yet. Maybe in some later series. But it's a really simple concept that I really suggest for you to become a master of your signal flow chain and what's going on is to master your understanding of the equipment that you have. So no matter whether you're starting out from the beginning of the signal flow chain to the end of the signal flow chain going to your DAW that's going to end up on a track somewhere and out from there. It's going to go from that track when you play back somewhere else. So it's going through the system that's possibly going to buses and FX channels to eventually to the main out that's going to your monitors and your headphones. And you might have other sends off of there or other buses that are going to other pieces of software or other audio setups for listening that you have set up. Or, I've got my things sent to Soundflower when I want to send things other places. It can get more and more complicated as you go along. But the simpler you keep your setup at first, it shouldn't be that difficult for you to research it and understand your signal flow in your setup. Me trying to teach you about that in your setup is nearly impossible because I don't know what you bought. If you get into some groups about audio engineering, you'll find that everybody's wearing mismatched socks. They have a dabble in all kinds of things using different types of equipment to the way they want their studio. So it's like they don't go out and buy a setup that's from Bob's setup and Timmy's setup and Jimmy's setup. They're all wearing mismatched socks, which is kind of funky, but also can be a cool thing because you can get answers. If you're having a problem understanding where things are going and what's happening, that you can get in a lot of audio engineering groups and the forums of wherever your software or hardware came from to get the answers that you need. State your questions simply to get good answers. Wait for answers. Check those answers. If they're not good, restate the question differently to get better answers if they don't seem like they're understanding it. But it's a pretty simple setup. You really want to, the understanding that I would teach you, rather than try to teach you the signal flow of your studio, is that every piece of equipment you get or is in your signal flow chain, to research it thoroughly. From your microphone, read about it thoroughly, understanding the microphone itself, to the cords, to the interface, to your USB hub, your computer, your monitors, your headphones, your MIDI keyboard, your MIDI input keyboard, the input going from there, your instruments, whatever you're using. And in the DAW itself, really reading about the DAW, asking for a signal flow diagram from whatever whatever DAW you're using and whatever software you're using, to try to understand where things are going and where things can possibly go, because it more than likely will explain to you fairly well where things are going. And you just need to master that information and knowledge and practice a usable, how do I say, mastering the knowledge and the usage of the knowledge, so that when you're sending things other places, it can be very simple from just your inputs and your outputs, going to, looking for your audio setup and what inputs and outputs you're able to use, your blocks. I mean, all this information, external devices, how your system is set up, and how it searches for them, reads them, and directs them, so that you understand how your system is worked. That's the software that you've chosen. And even in your DAW, what's going on, where are you getting input from, where's the input coming from, what does this stuff mean, where is it going, my main out, where can I send stuff to side chains, to other buses, to wherever, and where that stuff is, options of your signal flow in your software and your hardware, and what that means. That is the best way to master the signal flow of what is happening in your system. So for me to make a bunch of videos about that would be ridiculous. I'd be happy to answer questions if you have specific questions, but it's more than likely that your system is not going to be exactly set up like somebody else. And there might be differences of what's going on, unless your system's my system, I went through all that and I scaled my system down to as simple as possible. And I do almost everything in the box. So I reduce signal flow, and I trust the algorithms that are running the code better than I do hardware. And plus, I don't have to look outside the box to get things done. Most of the things I do that I find are most important are done in the box anyway. So you really need to master that knowledge and the usage of that knowledge by researching it and researching what you have. Get a simple setup to start with. As you add to it, you're going to add more complex signal flow paths that are just going to be an extension of what you're doing. Does that make sense? And if you look at it that way, that you're extending the signal flow path so that you can understand where there are issues and you can move around inside of your system well and have a good understanding of how to move around your system. The only person that's going to give you that is you. You're going to put together a system and decide on your computer, your software, your interface, your monitors, your headphones, your keyboard input, your cords, so that you sit down and have that worked out and then research exactly where everything is going. And it shouldn't be that difficult. And then you not only will you master your signal flow chain in your hardware and your software, but not only master the knowledge of it by researching and reading about this equipment that you have and the software that you have, but you will master in the process the possibilities of where it can go. Does that make sense? So that when you want to do different things, you'll know where those options are at, or if they're available options, or if you can do things, or if that isn't an option. Even some simple things like, when you're in your mix and you're trying to go look at sends or wherever, is that pre-fader or post-fader? That's a simple question, but you'd be surprised. Well, I don't know what that means, post-fader or post-fader. It's in the manual, bro. It is, if you read about it and you read it thoroughly. So to master that information, that it's very specific to your setup and the equipment and software that you have, and you just need to immerse yourself in it, because signal flow is really important, and where things are going in the DAW and where the signal go is really important. And so you really want to master that knowledge and the usage of that knowledge and the possibilities thereof. And the only way you're going to get that knowledge is to get your system set up, and then you study that and research that and immerse yourself in that. And it's not that big a deal. As you have questions, First of all, go to the software manufacturers forums and go to the hardware manufacturers forums of the equipment that you have. Does that make sense? And next of all, there's plenty of audio engineering groups that you can. I'm part of, I don't know how many audio engineering groups that they're all wearing mismatched socks all over the place. So you can post your questions all over the place, and once you've read and immersed yourself in the understanding of your software and equipment and research those manuals well, they can a lot of times really help you get answers. But you'll find that that tedious task that may not seem like a lot of fun, it's really dry and boring, that you have to understand what the equipment you're using well, is understanding that signal flow path and where things are going, where they can go, so that it's not a question for you. That way, as you're doing production, you work on becoming yourself a virtuoso master audio engineer, that you will really start to understand the possibilities of what you can do. And as you get better and you start trying to incorporate other things and extras into your signal flow path to do other different kinds of processing and mixing techniques or whatever, that they're going to be incorporated into the signal path that you already understand very well. So you targeting where in the signal path that's happening and how to bring that into the signal path and out of the signal path to get done what you want won't be that big of a deal, because a lot of it will be very obvious what you need to do at that point. And anything that's not real obvious, that you can get some questions, some answers really quickly from the places that I suggested. And also, it's very likely that your DAW, hardware, software, whatever that you're using might have other extras that aren't available in other software and hardware that you are going to stumble upon. And it can also be like a new discovery for you. It's like, whoa, I can do that? That's really wild. I didn't even know that was possible. Well, you just learned something else about your signal flow and what possibilities there are with your signal flow. And you can work on mastering your knowledge and usage of that, making good notebooks, good notes about it, getting signal flow diagrams from the hardware and software that you're using, keeping them in notebooks, pictures of it or whatever, so that you can go reference it. You might not use that for a long time, but you can go back and go, what happens if I do that? Oh man, it's been so long since I did right to do that. How do I do that? Go back to your notebooks. I researched it really well. I made really good notes about my entire signal flow path, the possibilities, how do I get things done, how the signal flow path can be changed by this knob or this button or this, adding a bus or FX channel or using it different or making a different out or, aux sends or whatever you're doing, that, that immersion will answer those questions. And as you run into elaborating on your studio and making it bigger and bigger and bigger, that it's just extras added into your signal flow chain that you'll already have a pretty good idea of where that's going to happen, just a matter of how to get it done. And then it's a pretty simple question most of the time of relating your setup to somebody to try to get an answer of how you incorporate that in your signal flow properly so that you're doing a good job. So with that being said, that my direction is for you to do what I've told you to understand your signal flow, because mastering your signal flow in the system that you've decided upon is very important, and it needs to be researched by you specifically for the setup that you have. So make some good notebooks for reference, and peace, hope, love. I'll see you in the next video.